All right, so open our Bibles this morning to the Gospel of Luke chapter 5, verse 1. Luke was a doctor who wasn't around early on with the disciples, but he was given by the Lord as a Gentile the responsibility of going and interviewing eyewitness accounts and testimonies, and then writing this gospel based upon what he had been told. And so as a doctor, he's very deliberate, very studious, if you will, covers things in great detail, calls out diseases by name, if you will. As a Gentile, he's very interested in knowing and letting the Gentiles know that they were part of God's plan for salvation from the beginning. And as a fellow who went to verify, he gives us great insights, some of them very in-depth, of things that we couldn't find in the other Gospels. So we've been going through fairly slowly. He's given to us the preparation for Jesus' birth by looking at the announcement of John the Baptist's birth, Jesus' birth, announcements that were made. We get a short insight into Jesus' early years of life, a little bit that we have in Luke, 2 verses. John gives it to us in chapters, he doesn't really give us any more of that either. And then we are given, if you will, the ministry of John the Baptist, the baptism of Jesus, his temptation in the wilderness. And then Luke covers the first year of Jesus' 3.5-year ministry in 2 verses. And that's really where John jumps in. John 1, 2, 3, and 4 cover all that we know about the first of those 3.5 years of ministry, called the years of obscurity usually. When John the Baptist was arrested, Jesus moved north to Nazareth and then to Capernaum with a message of preaching that people should repent, the kingdom of heaven was at hand. And this obscure ministry of Jesus, which had drawn him lots of followers, now began to polarize people because now it was personally applied to every heart. And so when John was taken out of the way, the Lord kind of took his place, if you will. We spent a couple of weeks looking at Jesus' homecoming to Nazareth, where initially they were really happy to see him until they heard what he was saying, and then they tried to kill him. And then last week we spent from verse 31 through verse 44 a day with Jesus in Capernaum, where he moved his household. He moved to Capernaum, made it his hometown. It's where he paid his taxes. More miracles were done here than in any other city in the scriptures. And we spent a day in the life of Jesus in Capernaum with a man that was possessed by a demon early on in the morning in the synagogue, with Peter's mother-in-law is sick, where he ministered to her in the afternoon. At night after the Sabbath was over, I don't know how many people showed up to be healed and delivered. The Lord stayed up till all hours of the night, ministering to all who came. And then we're told before dawn the next morning, he got up and went out to pray. When they finally found him, they say, "Hey, everybody's looking for you." And Jesus said, "Yeah, we got to go to another town, because this is why I've come, to preach the good news to men." And so we left it there. This morning, it is the second year of Jesus' ministry. I think it's important that you know that in light of what we're going to look at in these 11 verses. And we're going to find some followers of Jesus who'd been with him a long time, now finally come to know him in a personal way that changes the way they would live and serve him. Verse 1 says this: "So it was, as the multitudes pressed about him to hear the word of God, that Jesus stood by the lake of Gennesaret." The word Gennesaret is the Greek word for garden. If you've ever been to the land of Israel, I think it's the most beautiful part of the land. Everybody likes to go to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem's just filled with crazy people, and loud and religious and busy, and cars running you over. And then you go up to the north and it's nice. It's like going to Lake Tahoe. You hang around the lake, Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias. It's a freshwater lake. It's about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide or so, 1,200 feet deep. It's the second lowest elevation lake in the world, 668 feet below sea level. It will eventually run into the Jordan River, run completely south, dump into a saltwater lake, the Dead Sea, which is the lowest elevation lake in the world, 1,400 feet or so below sea level. But it's beautiful. In the north, it's beautiful. You can see why the Lord liked ministering there. It is a beautiful place to be. And he spends most of 18 months there before that last year's push, I should say, towards Jerusalem and towards the cross. But notice in verse 1 that there were, at least in the second year of ministry, tons of people following him. The crowds pressing against him, pressing in against him. I think Mark says of this time, all of the common people heard him gladly. He was reaching the hearts of the normal, everyday man and woman who were really interested in their spiritual well-being. It's a beautiful picture of a hunger that was brewing, I think, in the ways, in the people for the word of the Lord. I must tell you, one of my prayers on my prayer list is always that we might see that hunger again. I grew up in the 60s and early 70s with the Jesus movement. I taught at Downey Calvary for years on Sunday nights. We'd easily have 1,500 people show up at night. We had a 6 o'clock study. Most of those 1,500 people would show up at 5. Now you say, why? Well, like you, they have a place that they like to sit. I know that because I can see you're in the same spot every week for the most part. But more than that, they came to pray for each other, to share, to get ready for the study. There was a revival in the early 70s, late 60s that was unmatched since that day. God was doing something very different. We would show movies on Saturday night, or Friday nights, concerts on Saturday nights. We'd easily have, 2,000 people show up. Sometimes 4,000 people show up for a Christian concert. We couldn't fit them all in. We'd have a concert at 7:30, and then we'd send everybody home, and then we'd start again at 9:30. It wouldn't be unheard of to see 500 people get saved on a single night. And it wasn't that anybody was a great preacher. God was just at work. It was just an amazing kind of a time to live in. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could just see that one more time? David wrote in Psalm, I think it was Psalm 63, verse 1, "Oh God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My heart or my soul thirsts for you," like someone who's in a dry land. That's what we need today. We need some believers who are thirsty for the things of God. And it was just, it was the best, to me, the best time to be in the church ever was just, but things were so easy. Now it's hard, you pulling teeth with people a lot of times. I'm not sure what it is. I know God's hand is certainly at work. In the book of Amos, when the children of Israel were very unwilling to hear what God had to say, the Lord said to Amos, "Tell them that there's going to be a famine in the land for God's word." It became a punishment. He said, when the people come looking for what God has to say, they're going to find it. And unfortunately, I think sometimes that's where the life that we live in. And yet, God's word brings life, doesn't it? I think it's John chapter 15. Jesus said, Jeremiah 15. "I found your words, and I ate them, and your words to me were the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. I've been called by your name." There's something about God's word getting into your heart that can change you. It never goes out void. I think it was Nehemiah who said the people rejoiced when they understood what it said. So here Jesus is ministering around the Sea of Galilee, and the people were there in droves. I mean, they were just pressing in to hear what he had to say. We continue to pray for that, like I said, in our midst. We have a lot of Bible studies in our church every week. If you go through the bulletin, there's a lot of times that you can come to be taught. We had the opportunity to expand our facility as we grow. It only took, 25 years or something? Anyway, it seemed to take forever. But notice that Jesus goes out to meet the people. He's not sitting in the synagogue waiting for them to come to him. But here the crowds are just rushing in. Almost sounds like when you read it, they were pushing him into the water, right? If you've been to Israel, the Sermon on the Mount was preached on this side of the lake. So, the hill kind of gently rolls down onto the beach area, very small, and then into the water. But it isn't hard to imagine 5,000 or 10,000 people. You could easily speak to them the way that it's situated around the lake. We read in verse 2 that there were 2 boats that were standing by the lake, but the fishermen had gone from them. They were washing their nets. And so Jesus got into the one boat, happened to belong to Simon, asked him to push a little off from the land, and he sat down and he taught the multitudes from the boat. First thing I want to point out to you, so you don't forget, John and Andrew and James and Peter and Andrew, James and John, both sets of brothers, were in a business together, very successful one we gather from the scriptures, a fishing business. They had been with Jesus, according to John chapter 1, for over a year. They had followed him, they had hung out with him, they'd actually started following him as a suggestion from John the Baptist. There he's the one. He's the one. I need to decrease. He has to increase. And so they had begun to follow the Lord, but then they went back to work. And they'd go with the Lord, and they'd listen to his sermons, and they saw the miracles and all in that first year of public ministry, kind of obscured to us. And yet they were they were aware of the Lord, but they really didn't know him as he wanted them to know him and as they would discover him today. These men were disciples of Jesus. His name, Peter, had been changed by the Lord to Cephas. The Lord had showed himself to them. They believed in him. I think if you'd have cornered these boys and said, do you believe in Jesus? Yeah, he's the Messiah. But I think that their understanding of the Lord was probably limited to the Jewish expectation of an earthly Messiah, a political deliverer that would put Israel on the map and would raise their power to a worldwide status over the Romans. That's all that I think that they were expecting. So they had come a long way in recognizing him. But today, things would change for them, all four of them, in a dramatic way. So Jesus is pressed in on. He sees the beach was small. He asks Peter to take one of the boats out. He sits off shore and he teaches God's word to them. Now, we're not told what he taught. We assume it would be what we read everywhere else, that God has a plan for your life and salvation and the Lord's love and our need for a Savior. By the way, in both Old Testament and first century, teachers in places like this sat, people stood. I don't know where we lost control. I have no point of that. It just bothers me when I think of it. But when the message was over, and the message, at least in this case, is not the interest for us, but the main lesson is what happens next. We read in verse 4, when he had stopped speaking, he turned to Simon and he said, launch out into this deep and let down your nets for a catch. But Simon answered and said to him, Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. So Jesus finishes speaking, looks around and says, well, this looks like a good day to fish. Says to Peter, come on, man, let's go fishing. Get your nets and let's go out and get a catch. And the Greek word would be a huge catch. Let's really fill up the boat. Remember from verse 5 that the two boats had gotten back in, and Peter had admitted that they'd been all out all night. They hadn't caught anything. They'd already unloaded or untied their nets. They were cleaning them of everything they caught, which was nothing. They were just cleaning the nets, if you will. And notice Peter's response to Jesus, whom he knew well. He calls him master. It's a very polite word. It's a word with great kind of accommodation. Yet, as we read, you get the sense almost immediately that for Peter, this presented a tremendous conflict of heart. Master, I guess I'll take you out if that's what you want. It was a challenge to his relationship with Jesus, which was he was aware of the Lord but didn't know him as he should. The doubt that sense and reason and experience and practice created in his heart. He loved the Lord. He respected him. But this was his arena. This is fishing. This is what I do for a living. And by the way, I do it very well, thank you. You're a carpenter from an inland town who wants to tell a guy who fishes for a living how and when and where to fish. Master, all right, whatever you want. I'll take a net with me. Now remember, he'd been fishing all night. Look, you don't catch fish in the daytime with nets. Fish dive when it's light. You got to catch them with hooks and with line. But at night, they come up to the surface so that you can drag your nets and catch them because they're up on the surface. Jesus, you don't know anything about that, do you? No. You're a preacher. Look at my shirt. Fisherman. And so he finds himself in this difficulty. To Peter, Jesus' suggestion was absurd. I'm sure in his mind he thought these words, you stick to preaching, I'll stick to fishing, and we'll call it even. And by the way, we've been out all night, and I know these waters better than anyone. Now, to Peter's credit, he does something few fishermen would do. He admits he hadn't caught anything. I don't know if you ever talk to people fishing, but they'll never say, we walk on the pier sometimes, right? Hey, catch anything? No, but I almost had one, and it just got off, I'm sure I'll get it in a minute, They're eternal optimists. They're crazy people, fishermen. They're just eternally optimistic, But not Peter. He was honest, He's been out all night. But last week, the one that got away kind of thing. On the other hand, here's Peter. Put yourself in his shoes. Peter wanted to trust Jesus. He'd been his disciple for a year. He'd listened to the sermons. He'd seen the healings. He was aware of his power. He was all for him to an extent. And so with a couple of weak words of argument and lots of doubt still lingering in his mind, he says these words, "Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down a net." Now, Jesus had said, let's get some nets, plural, verse 2. Peter answered, I'll go get a net. I'll go get a net, verse 5. Singular. One net ought to prove what I'm trying to say that I really don't know how to say to you, Master, and make my point. Hand over his face with doubt. Maybe his mates on the shore pointing and laughing at him. I'm glad you picked your boat, not mine. Because they'd already cleaning up. No breakfast. Sore and tired and frustrated about a fruitless night. Nets half washed. Why did you pick my boat? All right, Jesus, let's go fishing. Now look, this is exactly what happens when you are confronted with God's word. In your flesh, in your mind, with your understanding, there are times when you just go, that's a dumb idea. Like loving your enemies. That's a dumb idea. If I start loving my enemies, I'll lose track of who they are. Right now, I know who they are. I hate every one of them. Wish them the worst. And we run into this faith against human wisdom kind of battle. And Peter's put in that position. It is vital that we somehow come to a place where we will obey the Lord, even when we don't agree, or when we don't fully understand the reasoning behind his direction. So that I'm only able to then be moved by, I know him. I don't understand what he's doing. I'm not sure I agree with what he's asking me, but he's the Lord, and I know that he knows best. Unless that's the Lord, don't get that. He could know. I don't know. Maybe it is. I think what we need to do is say more with Peter these words, nevertheless, at your word. We read in the Bible the necessity of studying God's word. We read, for example, in Acts chapter 17, verse 11, that they were more noble in Berea than they were in Thessalonica because they received the word with all readiness of mind, and then they went through the scriptures daily to see if those things were truly so. They devoted themselves to learning God's word. We read in the Psalms, the law of the Lord is better for me than thousands of coins of silver and gold. Now, you can say that, but do you really believe that? Would you rather know God's word than to be rich? I think most people go, oh yeah, fingers crossed, hope to die. We read it, but we don't have that kind of conviction that David did when his thirst for the Lord is he just wants the Lord in his life. We read in Psalm 119, I rejoice at your word as someone who has found a great treasure. Do you believe that? We have Bible study on Wednesday nights. We go through every book in the Bible. There's a lot of you I've never seen there. So I'm assuming you don't believe that. Or you're really busy. But I'll bet if I had Dodger tickets, you'd go. Or a Rams game, you'd find time. Lakers, I don't know. Maybe I can't even give Laker tickets away these days. But if we truly believe that God's word is that valuable, We'll do whatever it takes to be sure that we expose ourselves constantly to it because we believe it. What do you think it is? Maybe there's no conviction that diligent, consistent Bible study will draw you closer to Jesus and give you a joy like you've never had. It's kind of like Peter here. He's got Jesus in his boat. He's going, but in his mind he's thinking, wait till I show him what I know. Wait till he knows what I know. And yet, he has great respect for Jesus, and because of that, he's going to do it. He's going to go out with one net. He's going to give it his least, effort, if you will, because he doesn't think it'll take more than that. And yet, real spiritual life is found when we follow the Lord. When Solomon wrote about God's word, he said that studying his word was like digging for ore. And it took hard work, but it was valuable and worthwhile in the end. Maybe it's just that we're lacking a desire. It's hard to make a commitment to something that we're not sure is right. And that's Peter. It's easy to lose sight of the long-term benefits of something when we're not convinced that there's a long-term benefits. I'll use the same example in prayer. Most people will pray when they need something. We get prayer requests in the church all the time. Sometimes in the middle of the night, people just, you got to pray when you get this message. They're just freaked out, whatever it might be. But typically, they pray very little. And yet we are told in the scriptures to pray without ceasing, to do so without fainting, to ask and to seek and to knock, and the benefits of the Lord's response. And yet I think we approach prayer pretty much like we approach God's word and the study of it, like Peter. We respect the Lord. He's our master. But come on, there's just stuff we know better. And it isn't that we don't believe it. We just don't believe it well enough to act upon it. And so we have respect, but we don't have conviction. And so it is easy to be kind of pushed off the mark. So here's Peter's words. Nevertheless, at your word. Peter sets aside a lifetime of experience as a fisherman to seek to do something out of a love for the Lord and a bit of faith and a respect for him. But he really doesn't expect to see much come out of that other than, I would only do this for you, Lord. You're the only one that could get me to do this. One thing for sure, our duty to do as he says is oftentimes far clearer than our understanding as to why we should do it. But we should just do it. My ways are beyond your finding out. Well, then why am I trying? They are higher than your ways. All right. Then let me just do what you say. Well, we read in verse 6, when they had done this, verse 5, Simon answered and said, man, we've caught nothing. Nevertheless, I'll let down on that. And when they had done this, they brought a great number of fish. They caught a great number of fish, and their net, singular, was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled up both boats, and they began to sink. A couple of things I want you to take away from this morning. Number one, there is a tremendous distinction between a service that's directed by the Lord and one that is not. There's a lot of things we do that we think the Lord will be happy with, but we haven't really directed to do that. We haven't been led of the Lord to do it. There's no personal involvement or relationship in driving that behavior. And so, we might have started off with vision and fear and trembling, but we ended up kind of in a rut, mechanical, routine-driven, and nothing seems to go anywhere. Because we're really not being led of the Lord. I think there's something to be said, and certainly for your own life personally, that you have an ability to hear and to follow God's leading in your life. There are people who sometimes will pressure us in guilt and say, well, you should do this, and they lay a heavy trip on you, and then you feel guilty, and maybe I should do it, But I've always thought, and I said to our staff, the only responsibility that we have as pastors is to tell you what God has done for you. I'll leave it up to the Lord to tell you then what you have to do for him. Not my job. You have every opportunity, but I certainly am not going to twist your arm. We have a group of people, faithful group, go out every month to neighborhoods and knock on people's doors. Hi, from Morningstar, I'd like to invite you to church. Look, for some of you, that would kill you. Talk to people on the knock on. No, I'm sick that year. You don't want to come. And I get it. Maybe that's not your thing. And you go out and try that and fail, you're going to feel horrible because that's not where God directed you. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be available. It's not available for you, but there is a place for you. I don't know where God's directing you, but I guarantee you what he's not saying is just sit here in the boat. He wants you to get involved, right? So there's something to be said for you finding that direction from the Lord. And you'll even see it sometimes when you'll try to mimic what someone else has done that has been blessed, and you find yourself failing, and you go, oh, how come God's blessing them and not me? And the answer is very simple. You don't belong there. Find where God wants you to be. Let him do it. So what does Peter say? He said, I'm going to let out a let according to your word. The key is hearing from the Lord, because toiling without fruitfulness over time has you maybe become convinced that maybe God has other plans for you. The main lesson for us, and even just these two verses, and for Peter, is that if we will go out and do what Jesus has said, we can look for fruit that comes beyond our comprehension, where we're able to then look and say, man, only the Lord could have done this. And you stand in awe, and service becomes a joy because you just wait and watch God work. The results of obeying his word was that the net was filled and it soon began to break. And you want to go to verse 2 and you want to say, see, you should have brought more nets. But you see, Peter had a different mindset. He didn't think that this is what he wanted. Now look, I want you to take a look at the picture. Same lake, same net, same place, same people, fished all night, but now they were fishing at God's direction. And Peter believed nothing would come of this. His natural outlook was, all right, master, I'll take a nest. That's what it's going to take to prove you. We don't fish like that here. Peter had no expectation that this was going to work. Same thing with people going to church or going to Bible study or praying. You say to them, hey, have you been to church? Have you got your Bible out? Are you studying it? Are you learning anything? Have you been praying? And they go, come on, dude, quit preaching at me. They're not convinced that God would bless that. We need to hear from God and obey the Lord and be led of the Lord. Apparently, for Peter, at least in the picture we're painted, for a minute it didn't register with Peter. He was busy keeping the boat afloat, filling the net, screaming for help. He got caught up in the busyness of what he did for a living. We gather from these verses that his brother Andrew, his partner, was in the boat with him. The word we in verse 5 and they in verse 6 and they called for their friends in verse 7 would suggest that James and John were the ones who came in the other boat. And now both boats began to sink. And Peter, as he looks at this, all of a sudden, something snaps in his head, right? Boat sinking, middle of the day, nets, nope. And a ton of bricks falls upon Peter, and he says to himself, this is more than a political deliverer. This isn't a man, this is God. Only God could do this kind of miracle, except this miracle was in Peter's backyard. For all of the other miracles, it was out there for somebody else, but this was in Peter's boat, in Peter's presence. This was in his territory, in his life, in his experience, on his leg. The professional fisherman had just been put in his place by the Lord, who now reveals himself to Peter as he had never done. Peter learned this, for he had decided on the shore to set aside every natural reason and turn in faith and obey the Lord, even though he wasn't sure this was going to pay off at all. When people sometimes ask me as a pastor, how can I come to know the Lord for who he is? My answer is always the same. You should submit yourself in obedience to him. Do what he says, and you will find that you can trust what he says. It really is a matter of surrender. Not argument, not, hey, I'm a fisherman, you don't know fishing nets. No, that won't work. That's the old Peter. And even at my best, like Peter with fishing, I lack tremendous wisdom. And Peter is left here wiped out in the boat with a boat that's sinking and his buddy's boat sinking, and it finally just hits him. Oh my gosh. So we read in verse 8, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell down at Jesus' knees, and he says, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man, Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had catch. And so there were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you're going to catch men." And when they got their boats to land, they forsook all, and they followed him. Now notice what happens to Peter. He finally realizes who Jesus is. He's known him for a year, had great respect for him, loved him, followed him, was a disciple of his, but didn't know him like he could. And I find that that's true of a lot of people in church. They speak well of the Lord, they have a Bible, they show up faithfully, but if they knew the Lord like Peter had begun to know him near, their service to the Lord would be far different, because you don't have to coach them along. They'll do anything that the Lord wants because they found who he is, and they follow him. And it changes the way they live. The first words out of Peter's mouth when he realizes this is, "Hey, Lord, get out of the boat. Get away from me. I'm a sinful man." In the back of his mind, "You should have seen what I was thinking when you wanted me to go fishing with you." Oh no, the Lord saw that. Peter was clear, and he saw himself. And the clearer Jesus became, Peter got a glimpse of himself, and he didn't like what he saw, because pride has a hard time standing in the presence of God. Not when you know him. Peter didn't want Jesus looking at him anymore because he knew what he was seeing. I tend to believe, maybe you do as well, that we can greatly deceive ourselves about our own opinion of ourselves by comparing ourselves to others who we feel superior to. I'll use me as an example. I love finding fatter guys with less hair. Yet I go stand next to Jesus and I don't feel so good. You come to our house, in our bathroom, we have 40-watt bulbs. I look great in the mirror at all times because you can barely see with the light that's on. But I was in a store a few weeks ago and they had those magnifying mirrors. Those things are magnifiers from hell. No, they are. I looked in there. Bad does not describe what I saw. I looked over my shoulder to see who it was me. It was horrible. It all depends on the light in which you see yourself. Peter now saw himself not as the expert fisherman schooling Jesus, but as a sinner standing in the light of the Savior. He sounded more like Isaiah in chapter 6 when he said that he was from a people of unclean lips, and yet I've seen the Lord. Or Job, who at the end in chapter 42, or early on in chapter 42, the last chapter, he said to the Lord, "I've heard about you with the hearing of my ears, but now I see you with my eyes, and I hate myself. I hate what I see." Or Daniel in chapter 10, who saw a vision of the Lord, and he said, "I've lost my strength, and my vigor is gone," and he fell on his face. Not every believer knows Jesus like this, and I think that could be the problem. Because our knowledge of him should bring us to our knees, confessing our inability, and this whole wise in my own eyes thing just won't fly. And yet it does seem like God can only use you if you've gone through the Peter process, where you have to just get to a point where God makes himself clear to you. So much so that there's nothing else that can talk you out of your understanding. It says that all of the other fellows there were astonished. The word astonish in Greek literally means to be rendered immovable. It's kind of like, oh my goodness. These four this day would never be the same. And Jesus turns this fishing expedition into a spiritual lesson, and he turns to Peter, who's on his knees, and to the other boys and says, don't be afraid. I know what you're all about. I know you. Don't be afraid of me. Because you know me, I can use you. Because you know me, you know yourself. From now on, I've got another job for you. Now you're going to be catching men for me. I'm always amazed at the people God will use. Look around here. The only thing we have in common, many of us, is that we came to Jesus in our weakness, and he has made us strong. Well, here the call for these is to follow him now into a full-time ministry. They would leave on the shores a boatload, 2 of them, of fish. Lots of income. This was an expensive gain to walk away from. After the resurrection and before the ascension, the boys, not quite sure what to do with their lives, would return to this lake and try this once more. And they would go out all night and they would catch nothing again. And the Lord would come in the morning and say, have you caught anything? They said, no. John chapter 21, no, we have not. And then Peter went, I think that's the Lord. We've had this discussion before. Because they couldn't really go back to an old life now. So you read in verse 11 that when they got to the shore, they forsook all and they followed him. They forsook their livelihood. They forsook their success, because once they met Jesus, the world had grown strangely dim. And 4 ordinary guys become men through whom God would touch millions by their examples. But in order to do that, they first had to come to that understanding of the Lord personally. And I hope you know the Lord that way, because then no one needs to tell you to do anything. It just is going to happen. I know the Lord. It has kept me going for 42 years. People will drive you from Jesus. Situations will make it hard to follow. The church is a hard place to grow. I'm telling you. People are rough, and these are believers. But if you know the Lord, where are you going to go? When all of the people began to walk away from Jesus, Peter said, Lord, where are we going to go? You have the words of eternal life. There's no choice here. We serve you. And if you can know the Lord that way, you can become a fisher of men. Because you'll have everything that you need, and now you'll have a mission. Because that's God's desire. That's why he came. That's why the church is here. 4 guys who came to know the Lord after a year, but came to know him as they needed to know him, so they could then begin to be prepared for what lies ahead. Hope that's you. Father, thank you this morning for your word to us. I know that your greatest desire for us would be that we, like Peter here and the boys, would come to see you for who you were and are, and would see ourselves and what you are willing to do in our lives. 4 men who came to meet Jesus for real were aware of you, Lord, had great respect for you, called you master, did what you asked, even though they weren't at all convinced that your ways would work. And yet in one fishing expedition, in one glorious morning of fish jumping into a boat, Peter's life was changed, as was his brothers and his partners. In just one moment, ours can be changed as well. If you don't know the Lord like this, I think you should ask the Lord to make himself known to you so you can. Lord, give me the kind of love for you and conviction of you that Peter came to. Bring me to that place of just awe and wonder, astonishment at who you are, so that I might walk with you, and that you won't be an addition to my weekly obligations. It won't be an obligation that is a burden to me, but it'll be the joy of my life just to seek after you, to open your word, to get on my knees and pray, because you want this fellowship with me. Bring me to that place, Lord, that like Peter, I can see myself for who I am and see you for who you are. And you can send me out to do your bidding.